Everybody.
Good morning. Thank you for being with us this morning. We're trying to work through what the best sequence of activities, in terms of providing access to all of you. And we just thought that this would probably allow us to focus more at the task at hand in our meetings, and then be able to come and share some of the information gathered. So with that, I'm honored to have Senator Mazie Hirono joined our meeting yesterday. She doesn't get to Hawaii as often as she'd like to, but certainly when she's in the islands, she has fully participated with our efforts on the homeless. And as stated, we do believe that working together, federal, state, and counties, we will be more successful in accommodating and making sure that we can place homeless persons in a much better situation. With that, I would like to introduce Scott Morishige, who's going to give you an update of progress made to date. So Scott.
Thank you, Governor. So I'm happy to report that we're continuing to see progress in the Kaka'ako area, working very closely together with homeless service providers. So since the last update that we provided of placements into shelter, there's been an additional 15 people which have moved into shelters at IHS as well as Next Step Shelter. This includes 3 families representing 12 people and 8 children and 3 single adults. So overall to date, we've placed 8 families and 9 single adults. This is a total of 43 people, or 15% of the 293 individuals in Kaka'ako that were surveyed in early August by Partners in Care. So I think this is significant progress, and we're happy to report this continued forward momentum. Our goal is to place all 31 of the families that were identified in the Partners in Care survey into shelter or other housing options by the end of the year. And within 60 days, by the end of October, our goal is to place 50% of that number into shelter, so about half of the 31 families into shelter within 60 days. And we are on track to meeting that goal. As I said earlier, since August 7th, 8 families have moved into shelter. So, this approach that we've started in Kaka'ako, it really relies on coordination among service providers, government, and other community stakeholders. It's really focused on data, using the information that we gathered from the survey to better understand the needs of the population, as well as the information about what shelter space is currently available. This is a model that we want to replicate in other areas of the island. So together with Partners in Care, which is represented by Greg Payton here today, we want to immediately begin assessments following the same Kaka'ako model in other areas of the island where there are visible homeless encampments. So those are the updates that we have so far, and again, I'm happy to report that we're continuing to see positive progress.
Thanks, Scott. I just next wanted to introduce Senator Hirono to say a few words.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor, and Mr. Mayor. I want to thank the Governor particularly for bringing the federal, state, and counties and the leaders together to address the very complicated and challenging issues facing our homeless in Hawaii. I wanted to start by mentioning that the federal government is engaged in addressing the needs of the homeless in Hawaii. Some $30 million in federal funds comes to various programs that support support for homeless folks in Hawaii. And to the extent that some of these funds are grants, my office and the rest of our delegation will work very hard to make sure that we have as much in these grant funds as possible coming to Hawaii. As far as the COFA citizens, our congressional delegation for years had sought to bring attention to the needs of the state of Hawaii and places like Guam in addition, more resources to help our COFA citizens. And we have very much focused on enabling our COFA citizens to be eligible for Medicaid coverage. That was a coverage that was taken away a number of years ago, over 20 years ago. And when we in the Senate were working on comprehensive immigration reform, I was able to get an amendment into that comprehensive immigration reform bill that would restore Medicaid eligibility to COFA citizens. That would have enabled the state of Hawaii to be reimbursed some $40 million in Medicaid reimbursements to enable us to address the healthcare needs of our COFA citizens. I have a separate bill. Sadly, the House did not take up comprehensive immigration reform, so that amendment fell. But I do have a separate bill that will restore Medicaid funding. It is definitely a challenging part of what we do as a congressional delegation. In addition, the COFA citizens themselves who are here recognize the need for a one-stop place where COFA citizens could get information about the resources that are available to them. And so my office worked with the leaders of the COFA citizen community. There's a group called We Are Oceania that came together, partnered with another existing nonprofit called Partners in Development to push for a one-stop center. And we, with federal funding, some $325,000 or so of federal funds, opened a one-stop center to enable COFA citizens to have a place where they can go to get the information and support that would help them in Kalihi. And we had a dedication of this one-stop center last Friday, in fact. So our congressional delegation, and certainly I, will continue to work very closely with the governor, the mayor, all of our leaders, in doing everything we can to provide resources and support for the challenges ahead. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maisie. I just wanted to emphasize that's really important for us, and it really provides kind of a point of focus. You know, we do know that immigrants from the COFA nations represent about 30% approximately in Kaka'ako, and facilitating the community getting better organized helps us provide more communication and information, but also it helps us to organize support services. As Senator has mentioned, $30 million from the federal government. State and county also has several funding streams that we can make available to move these migrants from the state of homelessness into a long-term shelter arrangement. And finally, before we get to the questions, I just wanted to introduce Mayor Caldwell.
Thank you, Governor. Appreciate it. Good morning, folks.
Good morning.
It's, I think, a great day in dealing with the Kaka'ako homeless situation in a couple ways. You heard Scott's focus on the families and trying to get half of the families sheltered in the next 60 days. And we saw part of that effort described in this last Sunday's Star Advertiser front page story on the Micronesian couple with 3 of their 8 children who live in Kaka'ako who found housing at IHS. And this was a very heart-wrenching story when you heard about the fact that these are working homeless who came here for better life and for health care. And through the efforts led by the governor, they have now found housing at IHS. And that's the kind of progress we want to see. Part of that, though, is to make it clear that people cannot camp and take over parts of our city or state property that has been built and designed for everyone and not one specific group. It's not safe, and we've seen that in the increased incidence of violence. It's not safe from a health perspective because there's not sufficient sanitary facilities there. We want folks to move into shelter space, and I do believe that compassionate disruption does work. We've seen it happen in Waikiki, downtown, Chinatown, and other parts of this island. And we're going to begin that now in Kaka'ako, starting today. We are going to be putting up by this afternoon notices. They look like this. This is the general notice. It's going to be posted all around Kaka'ako Makai. So let people know that we're going to begin a phased enforcement action in Kaka'ako Makai. It's one enforcement action and a phased approach, so that's why we're doing this broad notice. it's going to be translated, it is translated to Chuukese, Marshallese, and Samoan, and English. So the population down there can know clearly what we're going to be doing. We're then going to be posting a more specific notice, this notice right here, that you can see there's a red line around the area that are going to be enforced. And as you notice, it talks right up at the top to make it clear, Ohe Street, Cook Street, Mauka of Ilalo Street. And we're going there first because Scott Morchier and providers have told us that this area is basically comprised of individuals and couples and not families. We do not want to move families from one area of Kaka'ako to another. We want to move them into shelter, but we went to an area where there's more individuals, and we know from the providers that in any given day of the week and weekend, there is sufficient shelter space for men and women in shelters around this island in the numbers that we project to be here, somewhere in around 24 to 40 people max. And there is that shelter space. Otherwise, we would not begin here. We're beginning here for that reason. As you can see, we have the different translations. This is Marshallese. I've never seen Marshallese before. And of course, it's also in Chuukese and in Samoan. And we'll post these both broad around all of Kaka'ako Makai, and then also in the specific areas in this phased enforcement. And we'll continue to do this specific posting as we move throughout Kaka'ako. We will not begin the second phase until the first phase is completed, and we know that this area is kept open and clear for everyone to enjoy. If homeless folks come back to this area through our roving patrols that we have going around town every day, and that's why Waikiki, Ala Moana, those kind of places look much better. They'll keep coming back until that area is kept open and consistently kept open. When that occurs, we'll then go to the next area, because we don't want to just do a cycle as we move through and as they move from one place, they go to the next, and then they come back to where we were. The idea is to get them into shelter and into housing. The compassionate part of it is that for the rest of this week, our community policing team, those are our officers in plain clothes and aloha shirts, will be going into this community and handing out notices, and Jesse Broder Van Dyke will give members of the press the notice. These unlaminated, they'll be on paper, 8.5 by 11. They'll be giving them to the individual saying, we're going to be coming next Tuesday on the 8th of September to begin the enforcement action. We've also asked our providers to inform them on their own that we're going to be coming, and have the providers encourage them to seek shelter, of which there is shelter space. In addition, we'll be handing out this pink card here, which has all kinds of numbers on it. We've been doing this through our compassionate disruption, and our roving patrol hands these out. The police hand these out. That gives all kinds of numbers, from where you can find shelter to helping with drug abuse or domestic violence. It's really good information. This will be, it's folded up, so it's a nice size. We're also going to be handing out these blue packets here that were prepared by Waikiki Health Center along with collaboration of the City and County of Honolulu. And we're doing this because we want to make sure when we do enforce that people can put their important IDs and other information and any medications they may have, they can put in here. It's blue, so they know what it looks like, we know what it looks like. We want to make absolutely certain that when we do enforce, when we're hoping that when we enforce, the population will be diminished because providers will help them find shelter space. It'll be diminished because they know we're coming there. We've heard reports from members of the press that in fact people have started to leave knowing that we're going there. We like that. We like to see it. We have very few people and we just clean up whatever's left behind. But we provide these so that they can keep their important documents in one place and their medications in one place. And we're going to give them sufficient time when we show up on Tuesday, the 8th of September, to get all their possessions together. We're going to do it in the bright light of day. We're going to invite the press to come down and watch. And including the posting today, we're asking the press to come down and watch as we post. We do ask that they be respectful of the people living there, that they not get in their way, but to show that we are posting and how we're doing it around Kaka'ako Makai. And Jesse did a press advisory on that. We believe this is going to work. And we're not going to give it a dead end date as to when it's going to be completed, because it really does depend on making sure this area, once we do the enforcement, is kept open and clear. And if it is, we'll move more quickly. If it takes longer, we'll take longer. And we're not going to enforce against folks unless we know there is shelter space for families and for individuals. Meantime, we're going to be looking for shelter space on other properties, both the city, Sand Island. We're looking to announce shortly the purchase of other properties in and around the city and county of Honolulu for our homeless population. And of course, the state is also looking for properties. So going together, all of us, I think we can begin to make a difference, a significant difference, a measurable difference to what we see in Kaka'ako today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mayor. And I just wanted to re-emphasize that the same process will be applied, as Scott had mentioned at the beginning of the press conference. We will begin data collection and other encampments, Wahiwa, Waianae, and others, so that we can begin to collect the data as we move through Kaka'ako. Then we'll be moving to other areas around the island. So with that, we're happy to take questions.
Governor, is the objective just to put them in emergency shelters without moving people in emergency shelters out?
No, in fact, and part of the reason that we've been so successful in moving people into emergency shelters is because we have been moving them from the shelters into permanent supportive housing. You know, part of that is trying to get people flow from emergency shelters to rapid rehousing shelters into permanent housing. And you know, it really is working through that continuum of care that we all talk about. It's really being able to help them, get them to a better place in transition, and then hopefully get them into permanent supportive housing.
Could that be part of your report, Governor, in terms of how many go into transitional, how many go into permanent, and how many go back to homelessness? So we can have an idea of, you know.
We are definitely looking at putting up a dashboard with data so you can monitor progress. And certainly that's some of the information that we would have available. Now, I don't know if we collect data on people falling out of permanent housing to be homelessness, but I think the rest of it is already captured.
Governor, does this accelerate your priority on affordable housing, tagging off of what Wayne had just said?
No, it is. I mean, affordable housing has been a priority, and I've talked about it consistently. You know, we are looking at the state properties around transit sites. We have a planning committee that's going. I've been meeting with HHFDC, Hawaii Housing, Public Housing Authority, really looking at how we can make sure that those spaces are being used most efficiently. So, you know, it is part of the real solution, which is providing more housing for our communities at the full range of housing options.
You were originally scheduled to post notices yesterday. Was there a reason for the delay, and what happened with the Marshallese translation?
So we delayed a day because we wanted to make sure we had all the different translations. There was a discussion about posting just in English, and we could have posted yesterday, but to get all 4 translations together, well, English and the other 3, it took another day, and we wanted to make sure it was accurately translated. So we now have those translations completed, and we can now post in all the languages. I don't think it's required, but again, in an abundance of notice, you know, we wanted to over notify and under notify to make sure people understand what is occurring, so that they can be ready and, more importantly, actually seek shelter before we get there.
Any update on the OHA property you were going to meet with last week?
I did meet with OHA last week, and we have a clearer understanding about what we need to move forward. So, you know, we are looking at all the various options. You know, like I said, we want to make sure that we have shelter space. We are working through the next step shelter, as we had announced earlier. We are looking at Lot I as another potential site. And part of it is, as I said, we are looking for housing solutions all around the island and all around the state, because homelessness is an issue that it touches each and every community. And we do believe that having solutions in each and every community is the best option, most sustainable in the long term.
Mayor, question about the enforcement in Kaka'ako. In the past, there have been times when enforcement was done in such a way that there was like, the area was taped off and then people couldn't go in to get their belongings if, for example, they've been out in the bathroom when the crews arrived. Is that approach going to be different this time, and if so, how so?
Well, I think in a couple ways it's going to be very different. One, we're giving a lot of notice. In the past, when we went to Kakako, and we went there, not often. And part of the problem with Kakako is when we did go, people would move from the sidewalk onto other government properties that we didn't have a right to go onto, or private property, wait until we clean and come right back. The difference today is that we're working closely with all the different landlords, both government and private. In fact, we're having a meeting today, one last meeting before we begin the enforcement action, to make sure that they're prepared to enforce our trespass laws so that we actually do make a significant difference. It's not just moving people from one side of a line to the other side. So that's very different. The other thing is, I mentioned, a lot of notice. And when we show up on Tuesday, we're going to make absolutely certain that people have sufficient time to remove everything they want to remove, because it means less for us to remove. And to allow providers who are going to be there with us to maybe say, okay, now it's really happening. Please come with us. Seek shelter space. To your question about if someone's not there because they're off somewhere else, I mean, we don't have a perfect solution there. But we know we've given a lot of notice starting today. Everyone will know. You're going to give that notice through the press. We're going to give the notice through posting. We're going to give the notice through the handing out of the notice by a community policing team. The providers will be giving notice. A lot of notice is being given. But someone could fall through the cracks, and I don't know how to address that other than we're doing everything possible to give as much notice as we possibly can, in multiple languages too.
So Mayor, is that the process? You're going to give enough notice throughout the island, or is this going to be like a 7-day notice to enforce?
We're doing this in the Kakako area, Wayne. We continue to enforce, through stored property or sidewalk nuisance every day, 5 days a week in the evenings, and in that we're going to continue the way we always have. This protocol is unique to Kakako because of the dense, permanent type of population we have in Kakako that I think merits this. In other areas, it's less of a permanent, concentrated group of people on city properties. We enforce on city properties only.
To clarify, will you focus on Kaka'ako until that area is taken care of before you move on to another site?
Well, for the city, we're working with the state to make sure that Kakako Makai is open and clear for everyone. We're putting a lot of emphasis and focus there. We continue to go to other places around the island on city property, Waikiki, downtown, Chinatown, King Street, Thomas Square, all of those places. We will work with the state government on properties that they own, that you have homeless populations. We have, like under the freeway viaducts, we'll work with the sheriff's office. We'll continue to do that. But, we have limited resources. Our workforce is stretched pretty thin. It's being stretched thinner now going into the Kakako area. So within the means we have, absolutely we'll work with the state to help make a difference in other areas where we have concentrations of homelessness. But our first priority is to our city properties and then working on Kakako.
Mayor, why
We've been
did
approached
this,
by some of the homeless individuals living there who have pets, whose concern is that they can't enter many of the shelters because of their pets. And given that Sand Island is not yet open and will be pet friendly, what is the plan to address their needs?
Scott, do you want to talk about that? Is it okay if Scott answers that?
Whomever is
Okay,
necessary.
Scott, or maybe, I don't know, Greg, if you want to talk with it.
As well.
Yeah.
So the service providers have been working really closely with other organizations in the community, such as Hawaiian Humane Society and Canine Kukua, to help address the needs of homeless individuals or families that have pets. They've been doing outreach. As I said, we've continued to see a lot of positive movement of people off the street into shelter and into other housing. And I think it's part of that general approach of really coordinating not only with service providers and government, but with other stakeholders, such as those that I mentioned. And I think, Greg, I don't know if you have anything additional to add.
Say who you are.
Aloha, my name is Greg Payton. I'm, it's P-A-Y-T-O-N. I serve as chair of Partners in Care, so I'm here in that role today. Partners in Care is a coalition of 30 nonprofit providers who provide homeless services on Oahu, and our collective mission is to end homelessness on Oahu. Just to add on to what Scott has mentioned about the data, where does all that data go? It works in a coordinated entry system. So we actually collect the data and put it into a database. So even if people leave a location like Kaka'ako, we know who they are and we know what their needs are. So if they have pets or other kinds of unique issues, we have that in our database, and when we work for placement of folks, we can actually use that information for an appropriate placement. That is, as Scott had mentioned, that's one of the real benefits of having data, is that we can specifically target the needs of the folks that we're surveying so that we can provide and develop resources to place them in.
So sorry, to clarify, does that mean if you have a pet, there's placement for you in a shelter where you can still have your pet, or will you be separated from your pet as a result of this?
It depends on the person and the resources we have. If the person has to be separated or discussed, so there are some resources out there for those folks on a timely basis.
Greg also. Greg
Just one other
also.
thing I want to add. As the governor mentioned, Lot I, and we've talked about the Lehigh Civic Center as two sites that could house on a temporary basis our homeless population in temporary portables or containers like we're doing in Sand Island. And we, of course, work with providers to manage these sites, just like Sand Island. And our goal is to create low barriers to entry, right, to encourage people to come in, so not the same kinds of stringent rules. So Sand Island, as you can see, you can bring your pet as long as it's not dangerous. And Governor, I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but I would think that these other shelter spaces, we want to have low barriers to entry to encourage people to move in, and they could be pet friendly as long as the pet is not dangerous. But we work with the providers of Greg's group, IHS and others, to see what works best.
Sure, I
Mayor-
understand the intention, I'm just trying to understand, because people are asking this of us, will they
Yeah.
be separated from their pets?
No, they won't if we can find a shelter space that will allow pets.
And if you don't have that shelter space, will they not be?
We will continue to work to find a situation that it better suits their needs.
Mayor, I was wondering, why has this situation taken so long to address that it's grown to epic proportions in a crisis?
I think part of this, Kakako is a really unique area of town. As you know, it's managed by HCDA, which is a state organization. Within that area, you have multiple jurisdictions. You have OHA, you have the Burns School of Medicine, you have the Cancer Research Center, you have private companies, and you have Kamehameha Schools, Bishop Estate. A lot of multi-jurisdictional areas, and it's more complicated. Just for us to enforce, the city to enforce, we had to negotiate a right of entry between our corporation counsel, Donald Young, who's here, and Doug Chin, the Attorney General. Unlike other areas of town, right, that we have control over, we can just go in. It's a unique area, and I think that's why you've seen the situation that has occurred. But, I mean, the good news, and this is the really good news, is the governor pulled everyone in, from the federal government to the state to the county, which allows us to address the problem in a coordinated way, where before it was we go in with permission in a very limited way and then stop, and they'd come right back. So I think it's a complicated area, different than anywhere else in Hawaii, I'd say.
So you don't anticipate the same challenges or roadblocks when you try to negotiate the other areas of the island?
As long as the land ownership is in one owner, if it's the state or the city, it makes it much easier. Yes.
Question for
But I don't know,
Scott.
Governor, if you want to add anything to that.
Well, I think it's just important, again, that we're working as a team. You know, as we collect the data, as Scott had earlier announced, we will be collecting data and going in, and really it's making contact, talking about needs, looking for opportunities to place them. We are going to these other areas. We do believe that the model that we've developed in Kaka'ako works, to have federal, state, county resources working together, coordinating enforcement as appropriate, working with the service providers so that we can strongly encourage the homeless to get into a shelter situation rather than being out on the streets. And, you know, as we get through Kaka'ako, we'll be working through these other areas. We have identified parcels in town as well as all around the island that we could use as potential shelter sites as we move through the various homeless communities.
Wayne, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question for Greg. Initially, when you reported on the 293 individuals and families, you said that 1/3 of them did not have the documentation necessary to identify them. Have you identified them, in fact?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, our service providers who actually provide outreach services in the community go out every day. For example, last Friday, we went out and met with about 50 individuals and families, just last Friday alone. This happens every day, and the purpose of that is to help get identification which people need for a place to live as well as for healthcare, as well as other public benefits. That can take anywhere from a few days to several weeks, depending on what the identification is necessary. So yes, and all that documentation is put into our database, so we're sure that when we have somebody ready for placement, they're document ready.
And also when they move to a different location, you can track them also.
Yes, well, through our database, if we have information, yes, we can track them.
Following up on the question of how we got to this point, not just about Kaka'ako, but either the governor or the mayor, if you could just speak to how did we get to this point where it's such a crisis?
Well, I do think it starts with housing and availability of housing for our community. And, we have been working for a number of years, but with the Great Recession in 2008, a lot of things in the economy stopped, and I think that was exacerbated, the housing situation. As a lot of the entitled lands were developed, we got to this place where very few developers were building. So I think that we are moving to a better place now. And we've always said that the long-term sustainable solution is ensuring that we can develop and produce housing at all price points for our community to meet the demand. And we have been short, at least for the last 5 years or 6 years at least.
Governor, I don't know if this can
Let me
be
just
answered, but,
finish
oh,
on that. So I wanted to emphasize what the governor said. I think you ask any of the priorities, that Greg, he's going to say it's affordable housing. The lack of it on this state, the average price of a home on the lawn is over $700,000 at this point. Rent is some of the highest in the nation. Last year, across this country, 440,000 rental units were built of all types. None were built on this island. We now have the loss in Kapolei, and we have a project out in Hawaii Kai that's going to have 20% affordable rental, but none. That's an example of what the demands that we face on housing. And so you see folks who just don't make enough money to pay for rent, let alone a mortgage, or save for a down payment, become homeless. And this is the big challenge for all of us in government. That's why I like the ADU bill that the council hopefully is going to pass on the 2nd of September, that would open up tens of thousands of properties for a second dwelling unit, affordable, 500 to 800 square feet, so the rent is not going to be expensive. It's one way, without government spending a nickel, to get the private sector to build units to help, it could help pay for someone's mortgage on the main property, but also provide a rental unit for someone who needs it. We need to do more of this. I know the governor's looking at it, and until we address that, this growing homeless problem is going to continue to grow.
in that respect, I went to the Hawaii Tourism Conference, and they said the 85% occupancy rates at the hotels has resulted in 20 to 30,000 illegal transient vacation units being rented to tourists. So that in and of itself is a problem that causes homelessness. The ADU issue, what happens when they become illegal transient units?
So that's where the council, I think, made the bill that we put in to get better, is they put a lot more requirements to make sure that our ADUs do not become transient vacation rentals. And the best part of it, Wayne, I mean, the clearest bright line is that to have if someone's in this unit, they got to show a 6-month rental agreement. Most of us, when we rent, you've got to sign a standard Realtors Association year-long rental agreement. So if they don't have that with their name on it, with their ID, it's bright line, their violation, and they get sanctioned and fined, heavy fines. So I think we made sure that that was in the ADU case. Now, in other violations, right, we have a lot of illegal vacation rentals, and our Department of Planning and Permitting is out there trying to enforce every day. It's a huge challenge, and our DPP department is trying to push out a lot more permits to build more housing. So their inspection side needs to be beefed up, but that costs money. But I do believe the ADU bill has bright lines. We put in legislation that did not pass. It would have made it absolutely clear, if you did not have your license number when you advertise in Airbnb or any of those organizations, bright line, you're in violation and you can be fined. That bill has not moved, but that would also help us address the problem.
Congresswoman Hirono, if I could ask you about the COFA citizens. What have you heard from the constituents in your district regarding the homeless COFA citizens' impact on their businesses? And do you feel that the One Stop Center will truly help the citizens assimilate better?
it certainly will help that the COFA citizens have one place where there will be other COFA citizens who are there to engage with them and to provide information and assistance. But we all recognize that this whole situation is very complicated. The homeless population is not a monolithic population. There is no magic bullet. There is no one-size-fits-all answer to everyone, but this whole of government approach is very important, partnering with the private sector, the providers, people in our community who want to come up with a more sustainable way to address the needs of our homeless population. That includes the veterans, by the way, and as a member of the Veterans Committee in the Senate, there is a commitment to work with Kurt Caldwell as one of 25 cities particularly to eliminate homelessness among veterans by the end of this year. So it is a whole of government with the private sector approach that needs to happen. And yes, we need to have housing. We also need to have jobs. People need to have job training opportunities. So it truly is a multifaceted process that we are all needing to engage in.
Are there themes that you've heard back from your constituents, some common things that they're all saying?
I think our entire community wants to provide the kind of help that will enable these families, the homeless families, to get out of homelessness situation, to have jobs, to be able to follow their dreams, because a lot of them, that is what they want for themselves and their families and their children. And so I think in Hawaii, where we have the Ohana spirit, you know, there is a desire to lend a helping hand, to help our fellow citizens, and I think that is so unique to Hawaii. And we need to work together to make sure that that is truly a reality in this state.
We have time for one more question, Catherine.
Based on what we know now, and this is a question for either Scott or the governor, what do you consider number 2 on the priority list as far as these other areas? Is it Wahiawa, is it under the viaduct, or is it, you know?
I don't know if we would have a number 2. I mean, I think that it's very important for us to begin the data collection process in all of these areas, so that we have a better understanding of what the unmet needs are, and we can develop a systemic approach of working with the providers to meet those needs.
The state contracts homeless outreach providers in every area of our island. And our plan is to work together with those contracted providers as well as the other service providers and partners in care to immediately reach out to these different areas of the island. I think we're not saying that one area is a priority over another. We understand that homelessness is not just an issue in Kaka'ako, it's a statewide issue. So as we replicate this model that we've begun in Kaka'ako in the other areas, our plan also is to look at the other areas of our state, the other counties as well, and have conversations with people in those counties to see how we can also start a similar process on the other islands as well.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.